And joining us right now on the Rothman Orthopaedics guest line, if you're a Sixers fan, probably have come across this article already from thepaintedlines.com. We have the author himself, Thiago Scabbia, on with us right now. What's up, Thiago? How are you?
Man, when I wrote this article, I never thought it would be me sitting with you here to end the day, but here we are, man. So I'm happy to sit down with you and talk about it.
Well, I appreciate you making the time for us. Here is your Twitter profile, so people can look you up right there. I'll put that up on the screen for people. And then here is the article. Now, this is what caught my eye, because I got to say, I don't read the painted lines as much as I should, but I will now. Thanks to this article. Your tweet summed it up here. Doc Rivers offered someone to write about his awful job as Philadelphia's head coach, so I took him up on the offer. This reminded me of a great line. I don't know if you know the Smartless podcast, but Will Arnett has a great line. Whenever he hears somebody say, "I'm my own worst critic," he always says, "Well, can I have a crack at it?" And I feel like this article did a great job of invoking that line a little bit, or at least the attitude of that line when it came to Doc Rivers' offer that, yes, you in fact took him up on. And Thiago, I will say this, it is a phenomenally written article. It's not just rage. It's not anger. It's none of that. It's just, here's the facts. Doc Rivers hasn't done that good a job.
Yeah, I mean, Mark, he asked, right? So he asked the whole audience if anybody wanted to take him up on that offer. I've kind of waited through the weekend to see if somebody would. I didn't really see anything come across, so I figured why not take a shot at it. As if you guys will read the article, you know that I've had some very strong opinions about Doc Rivers in the past. It's been 2 years. And really what the article served to do was to first highlight the fact that there's some gaslighting going on when Doc Rivers talks about his time here in Philadelphia. There's a little bit of a twisting history, so I kind of wanted to call that out. And second of all, we'll touch on is the fact that, man, it's time, man. It is time for us to see some progress, and we're just not seeing any of that stuff right now. So it's concerning, to say the least.
It is concerning, and I always focus on this, and I feel like every year now I've done the same type of tweets where I just try to acknowledge that we have been into this a long time, and I have a soft spot in my heart for Sixers fans almost more than any other fan base, because Sixers fans invested those 3 hardcore years of the process where it was nothing but losing, no hope, draft and stash, or drafted injured guys so he doesn't play till the following year or whatever it might be. And we still haven't seen this team get past the second round of the playoffs. And I always point this out. Doug Collins got to Game 7 in the Eastern Conference Finals. Nobody else has gotten past Game 7. Brett Brown, Doc Rivers now. And it's almost like of all the coaches, Brett Brown's the one that's gotten the closest, considering, and you highlight this in the article, the quadruple doink. If that doesn't go in, maybe the Sixers win in overtime, and maybe the Sixers cut through the playoffs just like the Raptors did through the Eastern Conference Final and actually win an NBA championship.
That's remarkable when you think about it. We were talking about it before the podcast. Joel Embiid's going to turn 29 years old next year. 29 years old. And if you're not a little bit concerned about that number, then you just you don't follow the history of the NBA. You know, 30 seems to be kind of a number that seems to kind of start to get to players. And for a guy like Joel Embiid, man, not to have ever played in a conference final or an NBA championship game, it is mind-boggling because you see the talent that he is. I mean, you put him up there with Luka, you put him up there with Giannis, with Kevin Durant, you put him with the absolute top-level talents in the NBA. And for him not to have an Eastern Conference final, granted, there's other factors that come at play. But I thought that the Sixers, for 2 straight years now under Doc Rivers, were at least positioned to get there, if not the NBA Finals. And I thought that Doc Rivers just did a terrible, terrible job managing their postseason expectations, which turned out to be the case against Miami and Atlanta as well. So
certainly. Thiago, if I was to grant you access to the Sixers in terms of being at their practices and being on the coaching staff, more or less, and let's say that Doc Rivers really trusted your advice, what would you tap on his shoulder and tell him something that he needs to do different as a head coach?
Well, first of all, after this article, I don't think that's going to happen.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, let's fish a wish for a second. I think he can use all the help he can get. But let's just say in this fantasy that you could give him some advice. What's something that you see him doing that just leaves you dumbfounded?
Well, I kind of touched on the article, a couple of things. I think that throughout the regular season, Doc has a weird way of boxing himself into a corner. So he relies a lot on his veteran play, right? We talked about DeAndre Jordan and some of the other veteran guys have come through the system through Doc Rivers. And in this particular season, we saw backup center being a massive problem for them throughout the whole year, especially when they traded away Andre Drummond. So going into the year and going to the postseason, I didn't think he had a coherent plan around who to play behind Joel. And we talked about Paul Reed, for instance. Paul Reed showed that he can play. I mean, in this limited number of minutes that he had in the regular season, it worked out okay, but you just didn't get a sense that he was fully ready for the moment. And I thought that him not playing throughout the regular season and only doing like mop-up duties kind of put the Sixers at a disadvantage, especially when Joel went down. Because at that point, now you're relying on Paul Reed, not for 5 to 10 minutes, but for 15 to 20 minutes. And you kind of tell that he's just not that type of player yet. But throughout the regular season, he showed that he could be that player. So it's just the over-reliance on veterans. I mean, we talked about Tyrese Maxey last year, played less than 200 minutes in the postseason. The guy is a bona fide star. I mean, he's going to be a star. You can clearly tell. And him not being able to play, especially with Ben Simmons struggling the way he was last year, all that seems to kind of come back around on Doc Rivers. And I truly think, man, if he does not change his mindset around that, the Sixers are going to be caught again next year in the postseason, just the way that this seems to work out.
When it comes to Joel Embiid and not wasting his prime, that's kind of one of the things that I feel like the Sixers are doing right now. You mentioned 29 years old, and Doc Rivers gets the huge responsibility, just as those other GMs that have come across have had that huge responsibility of not wasting this guy's prime. What is it the Sixers could be doing? I know that in the article you point out, and this was what absolutely blew my mind, the pick and roll offense and ISO offense. During the regular season, good on the pick and roll. Postseason, completely inverted. It was all ISO. Why go and make that change in the playoffs when it comes to the style of play that was actually working for you in the regular season?
I mean, Mark, that is a staple of Doc Rivers, man. That goes back to way back the Clipper days. It's one of the reasons I thought they've consistently failed as a team in the postseason, going to that ISO style ball. That is a Doc Rivers staple. To your point, I don't think it makes any sense. We saw Joel and Harden pick and rolls. It was a nearly unstoppable play. And for some strange reason, it just goes back to isolation basketball. I talked about on the article 2 MVP level years from Joel Embiid, and you don't even have a top 10 offense in the NBA. That's nearly unheard of. And it goes back to not shooting enough three-point shots, not playing with enough pace. And it's kind of inexcusable, man. I mean, this is the new NBA. If you think they're just going to live through Joel Embiid in the post and playing, shot clock offense, you're not going to win any championships, man. And we're seeing that with Doc Rivers for 2 straight seasons now. It is concerning because you don't see a willingness to change. I mean, unless you see something differently, it's the same narrative after every game that, we just didn't move the ball around or whatever. It's like, nah, man, you need to be doing better as a coach, period.
Yeah. No, and I'm aware of the criticism. I've read the articles from Clippers fans and from Clippers writers about what Doc Rivers did out there with his ISOs in the postseason. But it's like here you thought it might be different because Joel Embiid's here, and that other thing, the pick and roll, was working so well. And then you think about it working well with Chris Paul and it working well with DeAndre Jordan in his heyday. It's like, nope, they still didn't do it out there, so silly me for thinking that. What would you do with this team going forward? Because it looks like at this point, Doc Rivers is still going to be back as the head coach next year. What would you do with this team? Would you bring in a Bradley Beal? Would you just keep stockpiling talent and maybe bolster the bench? What would you do to make an ultimate change on this team? Yeah,
I mean, the big fork on the road here is James Harden. I mean, what are you going to do with that contract? What type of money is he going to demand? Are you willing to stomach 4 or 5 years of James Harden moving forward? I don't know what you watched the postseason. It was a little bit concerning to think that this guy could command that much money in the future. I think that for me, with James Harden, it can work. First of all, he's got to take better care of his body, period. He's just not a guy who seems to be in shape. He also seemed to play through some injuries, which may have contributed to his poor play. So first off, what kind of James Harden do we get next year is very, very important. Then secondly, in that same James Harden kind of note, to me, he's got to be able to learn how to play a little more off the ball because we have Tyrese Maxey here on the court. He can be that guy moving forward. He can command more of the offense. So is James Harden that kind of player who can command a little bit more off the catch, right? So you're not so much of a point guard. You're more of a shooting guard, combo guard type player. He's a very good shooter. He's a very good shooter still to this day. And if he's able to kind of do those 2 things with Tyrese Maxey, Joel Embiid, I think you have a trio that can work. And you don't have to necessarily tap into it, Bradley Beal or Zach LaVine, because to me at that point, you're probably talking with too many cooks in the kitchen. 4 stars, 3-4 stars tends to be a little bit too much. So I like to see what kind of player do we get back with James Harden next year, and then be able to work with Tyrese Maxey as a kind of combo guard / shooting guard type player. He's still a tremendous playmaker. He should still be able to run point, no question. But a little bit less load on him, I think, will help the Sixers moving forward.
I understand that it's going to be a little bit of both, but what would you say it's more of? Is it more age for James Harden, or is it more hamstring for him in terms of why we saw some deterioration of skills lately?
Man, that's the $1 million question. Man.
I know, right?
I'm hopeful.
Actually, $47 million question.
Yeah, I know. That's exactly. Actually, if I were to answer that right now, point blank, I do think the age has played a little bit of a role in this game. I mean, you watched them in Brooklyn. It went down pretty fast, and that to me is a little bit concerning. And like I said, history tends to point very negatively towards players at that age. So I tend to think it's more of an age thing.
If you're a young guy on this squad like Paul Reed, and one of the things I couldn't get over was how emphatically Doc Rivers pointed out that DeAndre Jordan will be the starter, like it or not. Oh my God. If you're Paul Reed and you're already told, hey, we're not going on a Paul Reed victory tour, and like it or not, you ain't starting. If you're a young player, why would you want to play for this guy?
That's exactly it. And that's exactly it. And the Sixers played a team in Miami who is the complete opposite of that. They had 8 undrafted free agents on that team. These are guys who I talked about on the article. You know, Doc finds reasons not to play guys. Eric Spoelstra will find reasons to play guys. And that's a very cultural difference between both coaches. And Miami has a unbelievable player development system. They turn guys in and out of that system. Guys who shouldn't be in the NBA become impact players. And the Sixers are sitting on Paul Reed, Tyrese Maxey, who has made a leap, Charles Bass, another guy who should have been playing, and Isaiah Joe, who's a knockdown shooter. Those guys cannot get on the court for whatever reason. It is infuriating, to say the least, especially when you get guys like Korkmaz, Shake Milton, who have just not contributed enough to warrant playing time. So, yeah, if I'm Paul Reed, man, to be honest, I'm talking to my agent. And I'm like, hey, is there something out there that you work out? Because I don't think there's a future here for me.
Right. Going forward, if Doc Rivers is not the next head coach, and there's some conversation and some questions about that right now as to whether or not he actually will be, is the next coach you think on this staff right now with a Sam Cassell, a Dan Burke, whoever it might be, David Yeager, do you think the next head coach could be on this roster, on the coaching staff right now?
Do I think it could be? Yes. Would I necessarily hire that person? Not necessarily. I mean, there's some talk about Sam Cassell. To me, he's just an extension of Doc Rivers. I mean, granted, he has not had a coaching resume, but he's followed Doc Rivers throughout every single step of his career. So what leads us to think he's going to be any different than Doc?
Okay.
Dan Burke has been in the league for a very long time, never really gotten a coaching shot. Maybe there's a reason why that is. The name that I love is the guy out of Utah. So Quinn Snyder is a name that I think if he were ever become a Sixers coach, it makes perfect sense, because Utah is a heavy pick and roll team through Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert at the time, and they're a sound defensive team. And I think a guy like that could really potentially change the dynamic of the Sixers moving forward with Harden, with Maxey. He's done wonders for Donovan Mitchell. Maxey kind of follows the same kind of blueprint. So that's a name that I'll be very interested in. But again, a lot has to kind of fall into place for that to happen. So
absolutely. I think that's a very interesting name, and one that I'll certainly keep an eye on. If you don't mind, real quick, Thiago, just a personal thing, just curious. Now, we had talked before the show. You're originally from Brazil. You have the flag in your profile, which I absolutely love. How did you get started in writing and covering in the NBA?
Yeah, so I mean, really, the guys at Paint and Lines kind of caused some of my work. I started a blog, kind of wrote some things about, the Sixers. And man, the guys at Paint and Lines are awesome. They give a phenomenal chance to work. We do some podcasts and we do some live videos. Austin Krell is a beat writer. He's credentialed. He covers the Sixers. He's had a lot of run-ins with Doc Rivers in his own way.
No, he's the one that inspired Would You Ask Pop that question, no?
Yes, he was the one that and obviously we got the soundbite out of that. So if you're a guy looking, you have ideas, you have a passion for writing, it's a great place to check out, and definitely, man, tap into what we do. We would love for anybody to join us for sure. I
have caught some of Austin Krell's work, and it's great stuff as well. Thiago, this was such a joy. Thanks so much. Congratulations on what is a phenomenally written, well-executed article. As I said, it's not just keyboard gangster stuff. You know what I'm saying? It's actually well thought out, philosophy about basketball. and saying why Doc Rivers may not have done such a bang-up job over the last 2 years as the Sixers head coach. So Thiago Scabbia, I can't thank you enough for coming on from thepaintedlines.com. Make sure you guys check it out. Make sure you follow him on Twitter first and foremost. For those that haven't seen it, it's Thiago. That's ThiagoPHL. That's like Philly. At Thiago PHL on Twitter. And then make sure you guys check out the article. Here it is in his Twitter timeline. I'll retweet it as well so you guys can see it. Thiago, can't thank you enough, man. Really enjoyed the article and really enjoyed the conversation.
Appreciate it, Mark. Thank you so much, and enjoy your work as well. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're too kind. Appreciate it. Thiago Scabbia from paintedlines.com joining us on the Rothman Orthopaedics guest line.